Welcome to the Juicebox podcast. My name is Matthew.
And I'm Brileigh.
And in this series of conversations, we'll be sitting down with the builders and community members of the Juicebox ecosystem.
Today, we'll be talking with Wackozacco and Peacenode from Lexicon Devils.
Lexicon Devils is a metaverse guild building virtual experiences in Voxels and beyond. They acquire parcels, design and execute complex builds, and organize interactive events including DJ sets, treasure hunts, art exhibitions, and performances.
In this episode, we talk about the ongoing metaverse experiences that they've created for Juicebox, their recent voxel builds and client projects, and their upcoming hyperverse concert, Forming, which features a curated lineup of Web3 musicians.
We hope you enjoy this week's show.
Welcome, Peacenode and Wackozacco. We're so happy to have you with us today to discuss Lexicon Devils and your work as metaverse architects.
Thanks for having us. No, this is great. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's funny. Both Brileigh and I have worked as architectural photographers, and we went to art school to study photography, and we mostly shoot architecture for the work that we make. So it's a really fun episode for us to record with you both. So we're kind of excited.
Maybe we can start with your pseudonyms. What's the story behind them? Do you want to start, Wacko?
Yeah, I was trying to think of like a more creative name that I could use a pseudonym for, but I was really struggling. So this was like one of the first ones I ever identified myself with when playing video games online. And it was actually because Michael Jackson was called Wackozacco, and he was like one of my favorite musicians when I was like 13. So it ended up being that I'll just call myself Wackozacco. And I ended up learning that it was kind of like a negative connotated name, but I didn't even really understand it at the time. But I think it's fine to use it against yourself, I guess.
And what about you, Peacenode?
Yeah, my name actually came super on the fly where like I was just getting really into crypto and I saw like a friend of mine, my friend Samsonite posted this thing about data rights and I was like, dude, you're totally into crypto. What's going on? And he was like, yeah, man, you got to come to Twitter. You got to check out all this stuff. And he like introed me to this whole world on Twitter. And I was just like on the phone with him, like, oh God, what's my screen name? Like, I don't know. Like, I want them to think that I'm like really smart. And I was like into like blockchain. So I was like, okay, but I want to like come peaceful. So it's really that straight up. Like I am Peacenode. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Brileigh and I have been basically using our real life identities for a while now in the space, and we almost have a desire to go back to a to a pseudonym, because it does offer a certain amount of freedom. So we've been lately kind of brainstorming all of these, ENS names that we could register, like Jello Palace, or like just random shit that we would, two words that we would jam together and kind of come up with this little identity for an alt or something. Because sometimes, I don't know, there's something about having a pseudonymous identity in the space that can be kind of liberating and freeing, I think.
Yeah, and most artists too all identify by their name, so it's interesting. I've always almost wanted to eventually, I guess, identify by my name rather than Wackozacco too, but then when you really think about it, there are a lot of advantages depending on what you're trying to do with the name too.
Totally.
Yeah, I really find pseudonymity like a core tenet of the internet, by extension the metaverse. But I also, like as a creative, I've done a lot of albums, a bunch of different bands, and I've never put my name on any of them. I always use a different name. When I do artwork for bands, I always use a different name. But I've always just been like kind of interested in pen names, not so much for like any of the like social freedoms that it gives you, but actually the creative freedom when you just aren't like associating with an identity that has known your mother and your father and like all your teachers and or whoever in your life. There's like a very freeing thing assuming an identity where you're like, this just exists for this sole purpose, and it's nice to feel into that.
Totally. Maybe you could both tell us what you were up to before metaverse architecture and Web3 more generally. Like, what led you to this niche? What were you doing before you got involved in this space?
Before I got into crypto voxels, I was kind of working a pretty boring job just in a warehouse and listening to random podcasts. And I was interested in cryptocurrency, but at the time I didn't even have a MetaMask. So it was kind of like learning about the virtual worlds that inspired me to go down the path of learning about how to actually use a lot of the Web3 tools. But even before that, I was super into like video games online, since I can remember. There was one in particular called Live for Speed that was like an online racing simulator community. And they would organize events in their different teams. And I was designing skins at the time for different teams and using PayPal as like a way just to send funds out for agreed projects. So I think it sort of primed me into seeing how easy it could be to tokenize something or like input it directly on a platform and overcome a lot of the issues that there were with having to like share your email address that would usually have your full name connected to your bank account with a stranger on the internet. Always felt really weird. So I think that discovering crypto voxels immediately clicked to like, oh, that could be really fun. And I feel like it's been kind of an ongoing journey since then.
Right on. And what about you, Peacenode?
Yeah, so before I was into crypto and Web3, I was primarily a poster maker doing posters for events and album artwork for like product design for vinyl albums, CDs, and cassettes, as well as organizing events and doing bands and various art projects.
Okay. And going back to video games, did either of you play The Sims or SimCity growing up? I remember spending hours just building shit exactly how I wanted and then playing the actual game for like maybe 30 minutes. So I was wondering, were there any games that you had played?
I never got super into like the goals of building a life. I would usually just trap them in a room and put carpets down next to a fireplace and then wait for the house to burn down. So that was kind of like how I had my fun with Sims, but definitely like poked around with that and like games like Roller Coaster Tycoon. I think like Age of Empires and stuff like that. I really loved that format of games when I was growing up.
Loved Age of Empires 2. Was amazing. I also liked this game Civilization 3. Really good one.
I think I played Age of Empires before Sims, so it made me want destruction in Sims somehow too.
I love that you mentioned SimCity 2000 as well. Like I have pretty vivid memories of like spending so much time on my cities just because I couldn't believe that they had a tour where you could get in the car and drive around the roads. I remember, setting up everything that I just couldn't wait to see on like the tour of my city.
Mm-hmm.
Good game.
Yeah, I played Sims, Age of Empires, and Secret of Monkey Island. Those were like my top 3 of my whole childhood, and a bit of Roller Coaster Tycoon. Same with Matthew.
Lemmings 3D, by chance?
No, unfortunately not.
It's a really good one. It was like a game where the lemmings would just follow each other, and you had to post different lemmings giving different hand signals in order to guide them to safety, or guide them to really interesting deaths.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did any of you play any like RPGs that were on forums or anything ever?
RPGs that were on forums?
Yeah, like the first one I ever discovered was when I was in elementary school, and it was a pixel car based forum. And so you would have to get a job that would allow you to get credits that you would then say like, oh, I'm going to replace or put a body kit on my car or something. And then you'd go into MS Paint and do it and like post about how much it cost, all hypothetically. But it was actually really fun, I guess, in a way to see it. And then certain people would get paid the fake currency to write stories if you wanted to race someone. And then someone else would just like write about it and you wouldn't know who won until you read the story and everything. So it was actually really fun to see how creative people could be with really nothing but MS Paint.
Interesting. No, I haven't played anything exactly like that, but I was definitely deep into RuneScape at one point. And definitely looking back on that, I feel like there's this strange relationship between video games and crypto more generally. Like, I think we can think of Ethereum as one of the biggest games in the world. And that's one of the ways that I think about it anyway, in that it is kind of adversarial, but also cooperative. And it has all of these complexities that a lot of these games had with, in-game markets and trade and all of these other, almost like political sort of dynamics that result. I'm thinking also of later examples like EVE Online that has this really complex political system and these kind of factions that form and all of this. I guess one question that we had for you both was what relationship you see between video games and metaverse environments, and do you feel like video games are metaverse environments, or do you see like a distinction between these two things?
There's some like interviews with one of the founders of Artifact that he kind of like says what they try to do is use video games as the zeitgeist for the culture that they're building. And I think that if they like talk about how Nike would really be heavily into promoting like athlete culture, I guess video game culture is kind of like a rising thing, I guess, with streamers and everything. Like, there's definitely a huge amount of money and attention around video games, I think. And previously, it's hasn't really been promoted super heavily. So I kind of see that this is all part of just us leaning a little bit heavier into that as a center of reference for culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I guess I tend to think of it the opposite flow, where it's no mystery, or it's not like some crazy thing to say. Like, the internet is the metaverse. Etherscan is more of a metaverse than any of these projects, but these metaverse projects are actually video games. And when you add identity protocols and inventory protocols like Ethereum in itself, and you can use tokens for these things, you start unlocking these virtual experiences that can be more meaningful, even in video games platforms that don't have rich environments or like crazy levels or crazy gameplay or challenges or stuff like that. Yeah, this social layer that is really interesting and engaging.
Yeah, I really like that way of looking at it. Just changing things up a little bit. For people listening that might not know, what is Lexicon Devils?
Yeah, so Lexicon Devils is a metaverse guild, and we do a number of things through virtual experience platforms. So mainly we work in Voxels, and we purchase different properties and stage different experiences, and host various artworks and performances on those environments in crypto voxels. But we also are 3D artists and social marketers. And so we have some friends within Lexicon, Xteen and JGAP, who just work with other people around crypto. Like right now, they're currently working on this project, Slothtopia, where they're just world building with this NFT project and designing 3D environments that you can cruise around in your browser.
Can you tell us the origin story of the name Lexicon Devils? Where does it come from, and why did you choose to use it?
Yeah, so it started with me and my friend Germs and Void Cross, and we were just like, our buddy Samsonite showed us his amazing record store, and we were like, dude, we have to do this. Germs was the first one who was like, this is crazy. I'm going like all in on crypto voxels. And we just kept doing build after build and falling deeper down the rabbit hole. We were like, we need a troop name. So we pulled a song from the band Germs, their song Lexicon Devil. They have a 7-inch as well, and just got some like really twisted lyrics and like beautifully twisted poetry, and just thought that it kind of also was a nice play on like the language that is sort of like required to even navigate these spaces. Like, we really wanted to like onboard a lot of our friends, but anytime we have to talk about it, it's like you have to pass someone a whole glossary thing. So we were like, okay, Lexicon, this is like perfect. That's who we are.
All right. And do you remember the first thing that you built in Voxels?
Yeah, the first thing we built was a strip club on San Francisco.
All right.
Right on.
The historic strip club in San Francisco. Shout out Germs.eth. Yeah. That was where we did our first set of shows. Like, actually, the first show that we did was an event for Pride. And I think that we had a couple locations last year for Pride. And down the street, we had another art gallery where we were doing like rotating shows with different artists who were minting on this platform we were experimenting with called screensaver.world.
Very cool. We'll get to your work with Juicebox in a second, but we were wondering if you have been commissioned by other DAOs or organizations to work on metaverse projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Most recently, we did this build with Dreams Never Die, who are a Web3 music DAO. And we have ongoing relationship with Sloth from Slothtopia. But before we had those relationships, we were mostly just doing one-off jobs for neighbors and strangers on crypto voxels. And this would be in the crazy peak of the bull market when there was more people who were making crazy speculative plays, and we would help make the parcels look nice and clean.
And what was the learning curve for both of you to learn how to build in voxels?
It actually wasn't too bad for me. Mostly it was learning how to mint and sell stuff, but that was what got me really interested in it. And I guess I sort of came on to Lexicon Devils after, it was much later in the picture from when they started, but I think it was right after the Juicebox project got kicked off. So I helped build. So in a way, I've kind of been progressing slowly over time. And I think since joining Lexicon Devils, I've really noticed like more progress on approaching the builds, because before that I was more interested in making wearables and like trying to put together collections of wearables. But since then, the builds are usually like a lot more valuable to people too. So it's been more fun to focus and kind of get into architecture more than fashion, I guess, too.
Right. Okay. And what about you, Peacenode?
Yeah, I remember like the first time I got in there, it was like the learning curve was steep. I hadn't really played with any 3D software at this time, and I was like, okay, everything in here is a cube. This is like hideous, or at least everything I did was hideous. And so I was just like cruising around, like studying all these different builds. And it really is my favorite thing about Voxels. I think that it's really cool to see these super sleek 3D environments. But what I really like about Voxels is the different files that they support. So, I mean, you can put in images, you can put in videos, you can do GIFs, you can do Vox models, all these different file types. And so for me, who is someone who's a designer and works in Illustrator and Photoshop, that was like a huge unlock where I was like, okay, actually, I can like design a lot of features in flat design. And when I pull them into this world, it adds like a whole dimensionality. And I was probably doing builds for like 6 months before I made something that I was like, I believe in this. And that would be about the time when we were like, we have to call ourselves Lexicon Devils. Like, we're doing this.
Right. Is there any coding involved to make something in Voxels?
You don't have to know how to do anything, but there's a lot more things that can unlock. And I guess it's sort of like an open-ended question, because like setting up the environments, they call it scripting, and it's just like a pretty basic language for what you could do. But then lately, I guess some people have been getting really into it and kind of like pushing it and adding more, like getting your objects to move around. Like we've played a lot with trying to add animations around the Juicebox parcel, but I guess you can really get into optimizing it. And it's unfortunate we don't have Terminal Man here because he's sort of the coder for us.
Totally. It's like they're actually really helpful because there's some like basic interactions that you can have. And even if you dig around in the Voxels doc, you can do some like cut and paste stuff that maybe you would have done. And you're like, if you ever customized a MySpace header, you could probably animate a door in CryptoVoxels if you have the patience.
Right. How long does it take for you to build a project? Can you walk us through how you construct something from nothing?
It just varies on how complicated, and then how Peacenode was describing, like everyone has their own process, which might depend on whatever skills they kind of come into the thing with. Because if you were just using the in-game tools of placing Vox blocks without opening Magic of Voxel, the program that most people use to make the voxel files, then you could probably build a parcel within an hour. But if you were going to get super into it, you could spend weeks, I guess even longer, just depending on what you're trying to do. Because if you're then wanting to create like interaction that click this button to open a door, then claim this NFT. Now that you own this NFT, now you can unlock another door to get into the basement. That kind of stuff just really takes a long time to figure out, depending on how you approach it. It's really fun, I think, what Voxels has done to make it really easy to approach, but then also really deep if you're willing to put in that kind of time too.
Totally.
For like the Juicebox build, I start with looking at the parcel size and then calculating how much I can scale it up to use the Megavox files and sort of doing a game plan for the design. And with that, Peacenode and I we even just like had a conversation of like, what are we trying to do with this space, and like what kind of inspiration do we want to use for it before we started to do design. And then we're using Notion to draw a rough blueprint for how we thought it would look, and then kind of like slowly refined it from there. And once we kind of landed at a layout that we were happy with, then I started to make it in Magic of Voxel.
Yeah, that was a super fun one. We started just our general plan out in Notion, but we actually did blueprints in Figma, which was like particularly fun just to have like everyone in the crew in the Figma trying to draw 3D things in 2D. Super fun.
Yeah.
It was a conceptual head stretcher for sure.
We all had a different perspective of what we were saying, but in a way, it's definitely fun how you can experiment with concept building in the metaverse.
Have you considered building in other metaverses like Decentraland or Sandbox? Like, I'm wondering why Voxels as the place that you're doing most of your work.
We do have some parcels in Decentraland and have built in there. For me personally, I'm not super engaged in what's happening socially over there, but I do think they have like a great community who are super active. Maybe Wacko, I know that you spent a lot of time, especially last Fashion Week there, so maybe you have a different opinion about Decentraland.
Yeah, we've talked about doing some projects as well in Decentraland, but as far as like why we haven't done anything yet, it's probably just a matter of time and concentration because every one of these platforms does kind of require to learn a whole different suite of software. And so it's kind of like having to balance that out. And I've tried making some sandbox avatars before too, but after I made my first one, I just haven't leaned into that, I guess. Voxels has been rewarding for me, but I definitely do want to play around more. And as far as like Lexicon Devils as a collective too, people like JGAP too, they're kind of like building their own little worlds too that you can enter in on a click that don't rely so heavily. And I guess just use Unity as a framework. So that's something I would really love to get into and I guess not be so constrained by the platform that you're building on. But there's definitely the cooler aspects of the community on each of those platforms that I think is what has kept me interested in CryptoVoxels longer too.
I don't know if you can hear this, but it just started raining like crazy here. So if you hear any thunder or lightning, it's on our end. Out of curiosity, how many folks are involved in Lexicon total? Like I know there's quite a few, but how many?
So we have a bit of a rotating cast.
Half or more than half of us are like on tour in Europe right now. So it's kind of fluctuating and we've had to kind of like adapt to that, to like want to include more people, but like kind of let people tap in and out as well, depending on what the project and the scope of the project is and sort of their purview of skills. But Peacenode could probably speak a lot more directly.
Yeah, I believe in total there are 10 people who contribute regularly and irregularly. So it's really about like 7 full-time people and then 3 others who kind of come on as like hosts, DJs, party personalities who help keep the energy going.
Awesome. Okay. Why don't we talk a bit about how you got involved with building for Juicebox? So how did you first hear about Juicebox and how did you start getting involved? Give us the juice.
Yeah. Oh, man. So I got a call one day from Stav. I don't know if you've met Stav or not, a really lively individual. And he calls me and he's like, Peace, what are you doing? You got to get on the phone with my friend Nicholas. Like, you got to get over here. He's like, get in Juicebox right now. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? Coming over. So I think this is like maybe around the time when Shark DAO was like popping off too. And so I got on the phone with Drop Nerd and Nicholas and they just dropped like heaps of knowledge on me basically. And we're just talking about all this, the whole beautiful infrastructure layer of the internet that we're working on in Ethereum. And that then led me to some conversations with Mios. And Mios had this idea and it was like, dude, this is crazy that you're mentioning this. This is what we've been doing. And we kind of like showed him some of our builds. And so we started cooking up what a cross DAO collaboration between like WAGMI and Lexicon Devils could look like. And the rest is history.
So did Lexicon start as a Juicebox project? Like, is it governed as a DAO? And how Lexicon Devils has used JB to sort of manage this role as almost like a service provider to other DAOs and like other clients? Yeah, if you could just speak about that.
Totally. I mean, before we were just rolling on straight up trust. And it would be like, yeah, honestly, Germs pretty much always managed the funds. We would just rock it P2P. And then once we got introduced to JBX and like Mio started talking, we were like, okay, well, if we're going to do this, we should totally build a Juicebox. It makes so much sense. And then we can have the treasury tools, which allows us to have transparency. And it really allowed us also to build like more relationships. Like, I mean, I'll like never forget meeting Wacko. It was like, we were throwing this event for a friend's drop and Wacko comes and it was like, every 30 seconds, they were in like the most insane set of wearables that I had ever seen. And so it really, I think, was like the Juicebox DAO that allowed us to be like, hey, we're doing this. We would really like to have you involved. Can we put you on the payroll of this treasury? And it'll just map straight to your wallet. Like, I know you don't know us, but let's hang out.
Yeah, that's sweet. And for listeners who aren't familiar, can you describe the various iterations of the Juice Bar and the Juicebox Learning Center? What did they look like and how could users interact with the space? Maybe we can go through chronological order since the initial parcel acquisition in October 2021.
Do you want to kick it off, Wacko?
You kind of led the first design, so maybe you talk about that one.
Sure. So we knew that the seeds for Bandyverse were being planted. So we knew that we wanted a place for Banny to live. And we wanted to have this like super juicy, super tropical kind of vibe, but we also wanted to build a sort of prominent institution for JBX that felt like a learning center where users could come in, watch videos, learn glossary, be a part of events on the stage up top, and just in general have little Easter eggs to kind of explore, investigate, and have this online digital experience.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of learnings. That is maybe one of the first builds that we had done across 2 parcels. And it just like revealed a lot of limitations that kind of led us to want to tear the building down. We were just thinking too about how we wanted to make sure that really anyone in Juicebox could become an admin, and it would be like easy to stand up a gallery. It would be easy to update the gallery without like breaking some other part of the parcel, which is really what brought us into Juicebox V2, timed perfectly with the protocol update. And so, we just wanted to make it overall more functional for the exact purposes of sharing Banny, sharing the story of Juicebox, but not just doing that in a way that can overwhelm a new person.
Right.
We wanted to build a new one in a way that we could hand it off, just because to me that feels like the main ethos of what we're all building in this space in general.
Yeah.
It's like building with proper documentation and building in a common language that someone else doesn't have to like clean up.
Right. Yeah, no, that's very sweet. And again, speaking to the ethos and sort of allowing anyone to continue to carry the torch if they want to. Can you tell us about some of the events that have animated the Juice Bar, like the treasure hunt in collaboration with WAGMI Studios? You've also hosted more ongoing live events with DJs spinning and people dancing. What do you think also is the value of these digital experiences?
So I've sort of planned the scavenger hunt with Mia. So it was really fun and kind of overwhelming in some ways with how complex you can make it, but kind of not knowing if it's too complex, will people just not even want to approach it too. So it was really fun way to showcase the new build, because I think that was pretty shortly after we finished like kind of setting everything up and getting to place different things around the parcel, making sure that people would kind of have to explore all the different details that we wanted them to. So it was a really fun way. And actually, like when you have money, it definitely motivates people, because I had just people messaging me basically asking like, or kind of even rude, just like, this clue isn't clear, this doesn't make any sense, or something like that. So it is what it is, but it's just funny to see, I guess, the different types of attention that different types of projects can get like that. Whereas like most of the time when we have a music event, it's usually just people wanting to hang out and have a good time. But it did feel like a lot more intense for the scavenger hunt. But it was really fun. You can even like get people to hack into a wallet, basically, if you kind of set it up. So I'm thinking more and more about that, like these type of events, you can kind of like get people to explore different types of technologies, and money will motivate people. So it's definitely kind of on the top of our mind when we're planning new projects as well.
That totally happened though, didn't it? It was like somebody basically forced open they guessed the wrong seed phrase, but it actually opened a wallet.
Yeah.
It's insane.
What are the odds on that? That's pretty wild.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you ever read your seed phrase and think like how obvious it is though? You're like, of course these words are together. This is my little phrase. Maybe I'm just sentimental.
Can you tell us about the JB Morgenstern's replica that you've built ahead of the IRL ice cream event next week for NFT NYC?
Yeah, but really just super excited to hear about that project. I wish we could be in New York too to get free ice cream. But after hearing about it, started to look on like the Google and Yelp profiles for Morgenstern's and kind of like compile a bunch of images of the interior and just kind of use those for reference, and built it within the constraints of like the parcel size that's right next door to Juicebox. Because we actually don't even own that parcel, but Peacenode has editing rights to it. So it's kind of a loose way of setting that up. But I think it's really fun that we can use it to kind of show off this whole event. And then still it's right next to the Juicebox stage. So any events that we can stream, we can easily share those too, and sort of like tie both experiences into each other.
Yeah, that's actually really true. Like when Wacko says like it's a loose way of organizing it, he means that it's like totally guerrilla and completely illegal. or illegal. I don't in the crypto voxels law, maybe it's fine. We used to own that parcel, and the neighbors, someone bought it and just haven't done anything with it for a year. And I stumbled next door and realized that we could edit, and we're like, okay, we've got to put the ice cream parlor here. So if you're listening to this and you're next to a Juicebox and you're like, when the hell did this ice cream parlor move in? Please, just contact Lexicon Devils on Twitter. And we'll make sure that you get some free ice cream. That's for sure. Yeah.
It's kind of an improvement, though. We usually charge for our builds.
Yeah.
That's true. Wacko, you've spoken about taking inspiration for your recent builds from Neo-Andean, Oriental, Tudor, and structural expressionism movements. And the current Juicebox build is inspired by futuristic mid-century modern architecture, as well as Banny, of course. How does IRL architecture play a role in the Voxels builds that you both work on?
I think it inspires art direction, and there's not really that much of a separation. And like a lot of the ideas for projects that I did on Architect Island have been kind of in the back of my mind that I've wanted to explore, and that it sort of like sets up the opportunity more that once I have a parcel that's like a certain size, then I can kind of like think within those constraints and kind of explore ideas that I've wanted to try and kind of see where it evolves from there. Because all those movements have sort of just been ones I've studied just loosely on my own. And there's definitely like a lot more specific types of architecture I want to dig into besides those, but I think it's more just limited by what I've seen, I guess.
Could you tell us a bit more about Architect Island?
Yeah, it's like a new island. Crypto voxels always kind of mints their new parcels in islands. So each island kind of has like a specific design focus. And one of the problems that voxels had constantly heard about from people that didn't even really care about building, or like complaints that a lot of the parcels are empty because people just buy them to hold them to try to make money off of them. So essentially they wanted to like give you a pre-built parcel. So with that, they let people form teams and then build parcels. So I essentially just had to build 11 parcels with a very loose, pretty much any direction that I could go. So it was really cool to be able to just explore what I wanted to design and not have it be a client focused. But I think it definitely plays into sort of having to really push up my skills to kind of like, I guess, achieve what I had in mind. Because like doing the thatched roof on one of the Tudor houses, I kind of realized like, oh, this will look really cool if I do this, but it's going to take 10 times longer. But I did it anyways. So it's really fun, I guess, to think about design in that kind of way too. Knowing that I have so many more parcels to do, but still kind of having to like cut corners in some places and not in others.
Zooming out a little bit, I think it's worth noting that a lot of folks under the age of 40, like we could broadly characterize these as millennials or Gen Z and Gen X to some extent as well, are kind of locked out of the housing market and are unable to buy homes or even small condos in the cities where they might live. And I guess I'm wondering if you feel like the metaverse offers some of these same people the opportunity to build sort of a digital life. Do you feel like there's a radical potential for this space to give users agency and power in some way?
I would say hugely no. Like a huge no. I think that it is one of the most shameful things in our nation to see housing go into the direction of an investment rather than shelter. Yeah, the transition from housing into shelter from investment is truly shameful. And these digital experiences can never make up for what shelter provides to someone. But what these do offer are new digital experiences. And I really do believe, just in the same way that in the last decade, a business wasn't really validated until it had a website, or it's like, it's not real if you're not online, whatever. I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll just see every business will have a video game. And for me, that's the underlying thesis, is that this is just the next layer of the internet and the economy of attention.
And I don't really see it as a house at all either. It's kind of just an NFT with a little bit more utility to me.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, totally agree with what you're saying, Peacenode. I guess my thinking was more that maybe the interest in building up spaces in the metaverse could be seen as sort of like a reaction to the material conditions that people are experiencing in terms of the housing market, and how maybe this interest in the metaverse could be somehow related to that. But yeah, definitely agree with what you're laying down there for sure.
I think, I mean, that's really funny to think about. Yeah, like if I had a house and I like needed to think about the work that I had to do on my house, would I even have the time to do any of this? Probably not.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That experience is also so far away that I have no idea.
Yeah, I guess one thing that I think about sometimes is I spent like the last 7 years living in Toronto, which is one of the richest cities of a G7 country, and all around me I just noticed like a lack of sustainability in what was being built, and there's just like this overwhelming push for quick, cheaply made public buildings, condos, and commercial towers, and it really felt like the city was more interested in trying to turn a quick profit on housing than to really build something that would last more than like 20 years. And one thing that I kind of notice whenever I walk around in Voxels is like I'm constantly amazed by the creativity, the playfulness, and uniqueness of each plot. It really feels like a breath of fresh air from buildings that we see every day. And I guess one thing that I wonder sometimes is if it feels like these builds in like Voxels or other metaverse are, sort of going back to that discussion of a response to having to see all these boring architecture of many urban environments, at least the ones that I've been like exposed to, like from where I'm living. So
It's definitely nice that it's not constrained by zoning, material cost, or I guess like any other burdens of reality like gravity or anything. That designing in the metaverse is sort of freeing. I also imagine in the future, ownership of metaverse plots is really weird to think about, but like as far as like designing and planning what architecture firms are already trying to accomplish, I think iterating in a virtual space would allow like physical spaces to be enhanced by the time that they are built as well. So I think in that sense, I just see that these virtual spaces will continue to grow.
Yeah, there's some amazing videos uploaded by the London School of Architecture where, concept cities. I mean, like architect schools do explore all this, and those explorations look insanely similar to what these metaverse projects are.
Mm.
And I'm sure that cryptocurrency is on their radar as well. They have a YouTube channel that's like really worth digging into because there's people of all ages who are like thinking about really interesting solutions. And I would say it's the only thing that excites me about these structures that only last 20 years. I'm like, okay, maybe that's like only as long as they should last. And maybe by then we'll have some new materials or something. But it's interesting because the creative software that we're using is what makes all this metaverse stuff possible. And that is just like so rapidly becoming more and more powerful, enabling more people. Like for crypto voxels, that has really unlocked the inner artist for a lot of people. Like Germs will talk all the time, like he's a musician, but he wasn't thinking about architecture. He wasn't thinking about art or any of that stuff until he got into crypto voxels. And now he's, like a fairly commonly retweeted builder in the space because people think that the spaces that they make are just beautiful. And to me, that's like a really inspiring thing about this browser-based software.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I love about working in this space just broadly is that people end up doing things that they wouldn't have otherwise done, and they learn about things that they wouldn't have otherwise learned about. Brileigh and I don't have a background in audio engineering or podcasting, but now we're running all these podcasts and it's a cool thing that we get to do. And I sort of feel like, of course, there's new tech and there's lots of things that are important about crypto, but more generally, it's just a different approach to working and learning that I feel more excited about than I do the tech itself. I guess like it's kind of a silly question, but did you ever think when you were a kid that you would become metaverse architects? Like, a lot of kids think about being like firemen or doctors, but this to me is a way more cool path to take in your life. It feels like a very interesting vocation,
No, I never would imagine. But I guess, like I said, designing video game skins, I was doing stuff in a similar capacity when I was really young, not even thinking about it. But then it felt like, I need to grow up and do something more meaningful. But then it's kind of like when I found out that, you can make money for doing stuff like that. And it's like, that sounds way more fun than a real job. So I guess that's kind of been like a rediscovery of like a passion and realizing that it can produce value.
Even if you asked me this in January of 2020, I couldn't have even anticipated where I am today with my friends. It's pretty amazing.
Aw.
There was a stint when I was a kid where I did want to be an architect. It's true. I was a Lincoln Log kid. So maybe it makes sense. Yeah.
I wonder if you both have some thoughts on the issue of scarcity in metaverse land. I guess it is an artificial construct, but do you feel that it's necessary, or do you think that metaverse land should be unlimited, sort of more along the lines of what 6529 has proposed with the Open Metaverse project? Can you give us some thoughts on that?
There's so many different things you could talk about here. Like, I think as far as when it comes to the open metaverse, what can we even like point to? When you want to get a website, you pay for hosting, you pay for a domain name. And I don't even know if you really own those things or you kind of just rent them, but there is still scarcity involved with that. So I think in the open metaverse, there still will be some like inherent scarcity. As far as land goes, I think it will be infinite, but only in the way that like the metaverse isn't limited to crypto voxels. It's not limited to Decentraland. Right now, those platforms aren't interoperable, so they're like these weird little silos. And I think that scarcity in these early development stages is a great thing to play with, because I think it makes for meaningful experiences for the people who do choose to put their attention in those places.
And the way the islands are structured, it's very interesting to experience a neighbor dispute in the metaverse where it's like being frustrated with the way someone builds something that makes your parcel lag or something like that. But I guess it's also like you have to resolve that by maybe just like telling them in a nice way and not just getting angry about it too. So it's very funny to see like what type of situations arise from the scarcity aspect.
Right. Yeah. Going back to experience, in addition to building structures, there's also an element of building identity in voxels that feels distinct from PFPs. And you both have particularly cool avatars in voxels. I'm wondering, what role do you think metaverse spaces play in letting users express their identity?
I think it'll be like with the other side too, and like definitely giving the Bored Apes like a 3D avatar of their PFP. That'll be pretty interesting. Maybe just like if it increases the expectations of any PFP projects that now they're going to have to provide an avatar on a platform. But I think also there's like a lot of flexibility that all the wearables are different NFTs. And so it's kind of cool in some ways that you can see someone has like a free wearable given out from a specific event, and you know that they went to that event or they were around at a certain time when that was given out. And so you can kind of use it as like social signals too, in that sort of sense, outside of like this, which that is kind of tied into scarcity, but things don't really have to just be super expensive for people to want to care about them, I think has been pretty interesting.
Right. And what do you think, Peacenode?
I mean, it's social. So as complicated as getting ready in the morning is, I mean, so too is choosing your banner on Twitter or your Zoom icon. Mm-hmm. Recently, I used this application called Huddle, which is like a Google Chat sort of, it's like a video chat application with Web3 Connect, and it reads your ENS and you can choose any of the NFTs in your inventory as a picture. And like, yeah, it was cool to even like not choose the PFP that I usually use, because it really was just about being able to look at my inventory. So I just think that when users can bring their inventory from place to place on the internet and can choose how their character is styled, when it's styled or when it's not, it's just one other way to express yourself that, yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's like, it feels ridiculous, I think, maybe unless you've done some of this stuff, like to say that it's like meaningful, but it does make a difference, you know, and you spend a little time in your character editor section and you're like, okay, cool, I'm ready. Let's hit the streets, ready to go.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Most of the time during events, the conversation is usually about wearables too. So a lot of like the interaction that you'll have with people, it's usually like commenting on how you look in your outfit.
Yeah, it's interesting, Peacenode, that you bring up sort of like your inventory. I mean, to me, one of the most obvious use cases of blockchain tech could actually be in-game items in video games. I think this is a direction that could provide a lot of benefits to people who are playing games and investing in in-game items and want to have more flexibility in terms of bringing them from game to game without relying on being locked into a particular ecosystem or a particular game. But weirdly enough, there's a ton of pushback from the gaming community just generally at crypto. And I think they're one of maybe the most stubborn audiences in terms of sort of not convincing, but, you know, onboarding new users too. I wonder if you've thought a little bit about this, given that you both have an interest or a past interest in video games.
I think they're just upset
Yeah, I think they're upset too about like graphics cards being taken from crypto mining. So they take out a lot of their anger out on those because it is a pretty interesting concept too. And it's very difficult to actually build interoperable models. But I think that if the consumers demanded it, it would be easy to make that like a protocol that video game developers agreed to. So if it can be achieved through these platforms of people that are like willing to go down that path and experiment and it gets good enough, then I think it could be like a concept that could maybe go mainstream. But it is definitely difficult to imagine like the whole industry adopting that. But I think that as like big brands come out too, and that you see like a Nike and Roblox have different wearables in there, and like every sort of platform has these interesting like corporate collabs going on, that there's a lot of money in the space that you can imagine like different CEOs will even be wanting to achieve interoperability. And like if that is enough to overcome like the different platforms wanting to not cooperate with each other, I think is the biggest challenge. Especially too, like Crypto Voxels has a little weird project going on with a better camera on Oculus Quest 2, and they talk about that they want to give you the ability to see your wearables in AR on other people too. But then I think that it's so interesting that like Snapchat and Meta now also have like kind of competing business models with their wearables with augmented reality and virtual reality, and they're kind of like all different markets. But I think eventually, like just with Meta, there will be like really easy ways to kind of port those across for like AR filters and whatever's going on in like Horizon and like what they're trying to do with like their whole ecosystem, and basically trying to achieve that just on Meta, I think will kind of set up sort of the infrastructure that makes developers more willing to go down that path.
Yeah, I really think it's going to take like, I don't know that if it will have to be like Creative Commons. I think that having inventory in the commons like probably could help move it forward, especially if there were like two different game developers who decided to like on a similar inventory. I don't know if anything like that has happened, but I don't think that the mental unlock really comes until you have your identity and you bring an item from one place on the internet to another and you're able to use it. I think maybe the way most of us have experienced that is through Ethereum, like just being able to log in on a website and your balance and your name shows with you. And until you really experience that utility, I think it's really hard to have someone understand why they might want that.
Yeah, in some ways too, it is happening like with Transaction Street or like World Wide Web, and that you log in and then you automatically like have your profile picture as your character. I think that like it's interesting to see that like it is being achieved in some ways. It's just not mainstream at all yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Changing things up a bit, when you're not building for others, do you both work on your own builds? I know we've mentioned a few of Wacko's builds, but I'd love to hear from Peacenode as well. If you could describe a few of them for us.
Yeah. To be honest, since January, I've really been full-time with Seedclub and Songcamp. And so there's basically been no free time. I've just been like super deep on working on this collection, chaos.build with Songcamp, and head down working on product design and doing a bunch of really fun stuff with Seedclub. Two of the projects are live right now, press.seedclub.xyz, which is a terminal for editorial and podcast, and network.seedclub.xyz, which is a job board with listings from DAOs that have come through our accelerator cohorts. The last build that I was a part of was a commission, actually, although I am staying in Barcelona and my cell phone is very, very full of textures that I intend to use. I've been really enjoying all the doors, all the building structures, all the stone here, and I'm like super excited to bring that into Crypto Voxels and try to imitate, some of the buildings that I see here. It's like the current design challenge on my radar.
Very cool. Maybe Wacko, could you tell us about some of your favorite builds that you've worked on? Like just your personal work and not necessarily for Juicebox or other clients?
Yeah, the Architect Island, I guess, was the most recent one that just explored a lot of directions. So it's pretty easy to find that in Voxels and explore the northern section called Elevation is the neighborhood and see some of the builds there. But besides that one of the more recent projects I had was like a Sphinx with Vitalik's head on it. And that was like kind of a fun one just to like go down a weird direction. That's something that probably shouldn't exist at all.
No, thank God it does.
Yeah, I love it. Oh yeah, we've been inside of it.
Okay, great, Perfect.
Then I have like a bike wearable project in CryptoVoxels. I'm wondering, I've pretty much got ready. I just need to like kind of figure out minting and variety, but sort of like making the different bike components as different wearables and then setting up a bike shop so people could put together their own bikes is sort of the idea behind it. And before I went full-time Metaverse, I was working as like a bike reseller. So it's sort of like combining some passions with each other.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, the Vitalik Sphinx is truly not the Sphinx that we need, but the Sphinx that we deserve. It's just incredible. I mean, I can't think of more unhinged and amazing Voxels experience. I mean, it's just so great. I don't know where you conjured this, but it's I'm so glad that you did.
I think it's too that it was for like a Chinese contest, and so I just wanted something that would be really weird since like trying to communicate based on language is usually not as fun, or like doing some kind of build that was pretty like tame or something in comparison. So it's definitely a direction I'd like to go, is just exploring really weird things.
Can I ask like what Chinese contest?
It was something to deal with lanterns, but the topic was very vague. And so it was kind of that I was sitting thinking of, what can I do? Maybe I'll do a lighthouse or something. But then I thought about it and it just seemed so boring to do a lighthouse. So then I just kind of like, I'll just do something random and make the make the topic kind of fit into the narrative.
Yeah.
It was pretty just random overall, but very interesting. And they did like it. I ended up like getting a top 10, I think, or top 6. And that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I love the pivot from Lighthouse to Vitalik Sphinx. Like that's a good transition. Two very opposite ideas. Yeah.
Just getting frustrated, I guess, by sort of prompts not inspiring me.
Since both of you have been building in Voxels, can you talk about how the ecosystem has changed?
Yeah, there's been like a lot of NFT projects that it's been kind of a rocky road, but overall it seems like it's still growing. They've put a lot of parcels out there, and like I think it's a growing community, and there seems to be more and more people I meet doing cool projects. There's cooler builds, like higher quality builds coming out, but I think that with so much more like competition across different metaverse projects, there's definitely like sort of a rotating audience. So it's definitely kind of interesting. And overall, like I'm still pretty new. I'm like 1 year into NFTs. So I think most of my experience has been kind of based on it. So it's hard to compare to other projects. But overall, it has maintained like a pretty stable level of interest. Just probably hasn't like exploded outside of like NFTs being super popular.
Peacenode, do you have some thoughts on how Voxels has changed since you've been involved?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I wonder if I'm going to get the time right. Was it May when it was VoxCon? And there was like some historical retrospectives on CryptoVoxels. That was so cool. And it made me realize that I don't even know what generation I am. I might be second generation. I might be third generation CryptoVoxels gang. And a lot of the early builders who I really respect, I mean, I respect the new ones too. Like everyone who's in there is like killing it. And in building, not upping the interesting builds, but continuing to do lore. And that has been like a part of CryptoVoxels like from the beginning. And I just really admire that people are like having fun in that way, like they're not taking anything too seriously. And I really admire the storytelling that happens in CryptoVoxels. And I would like love to see some of those like first wave builders come back, because I think they really like set the precedent for what you can do with those spaces and how you can represent NFT collections, artists, protocols, everything in lasting ways. There's some builds that have been up for 2 years that are like still just as you can go there and discover new things.
And they do continue to add new features like token gating and other new scripting, like just random little features that keep increasing the scope of what you can build. So I think that as long as they keep making more interesting ways that you can use your NFTs in those sort of virtual spaces, I think it will kind of continue to grow, because there really aren't that many platforms that allow you to build as flexibly, I think, as CryptoVoxels, and as easily approachable too. So it's definitely been really fun to see the like internationalness of the communities as well. Like the same thing I mentioned about the Chinese project. Like I kind of maintain regular communication with quite a few different people from Asia. So it's really interesting just to see how you can build relationships out of like Voxels as a focus. And like most people sort of, even if they do explore other platforms, sort of always continuously come back occasionally, and then kind of like go into phases, I guess, of being super into it, really heavy for a little bit, and then maybe going into real life for a little while, and then another platform or something.
Yeah, and the Voxels team does honestly deserve a lot of credit for continuing to press the features and optimizing what they're doing. Like over the last year, I feel like every couple weeks there would be some new feature that made it easier to place objects, some improvement on lighting. I mean, tons of improvement on lighting. And it's really cool to see them having a live product and operating on it while it's in flight. It's really cool.
I'm just curious, can you tell us just a little bit about what role lighting plays in these builds? Just we're not experts like you are, so I'm just thinking, like, is the position of the sun always fixed or does this change? And then you can add lighting elements to a build as well. Just maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Like a lot of video games have live light models on them, whereas CryptoVoxels doesn't. So it's mainly that you're seeing like a unrendered 3D object usually, unless the light baking is applied to those models. But I'll let Peacenode explain how he uses it, because he kind of like got me really fascinated with what you could do with it too.
So currently in the world, there is a fixed sun. And when you bake the lighting, the direction of that sun does matter. And that was something we were like super intentional about with the Juicebox parcels in particular, because in the past, we've got some stinkers where it's like, it doesn't really matter what you do. The lighting just like doesn't light the room up in a nice way. And for me, and it is true, you can also add lights, and you can add colored light and you can add white light. And sometimes you can like replicate the sun with that white light, but it does render differently. And it's nice to use a combo. Honestly, the first person who I saw really do it in a way that inspired me was BitPixie, who was doing these like beautiful white buildings, but would turn lights on really, really low so that it would paint the walls with light. And that experience for me was just so much more rich than a blue wall would be versus seeing that gradation from light. And it got me just obsessed with using lighting as an architectural feature.
That's really interesting, especially how you mention you can try to replicate the sun, but it's not going to be quite like the actual sun itself. It's like the same thing in photography where, we have strobes, but you can never really fully mimic what the actual sun can cast on subjects. So I find it very interesting how there's a duality in that way.
It's crazy because it's a video game. You'd think, right? Devs can do something, but no. The sun is the sun, even in video games. Yeah, it's amazing.
I think they do talk about the long-term goal is to have a sun that would rotate around like day and night time, because you can add and time equals night, I think, to the end of the URL, and then that makes it appear like you're in night, but it's still kind of rough without, like, that doesn't affect the light baking on the inside. That stays the same.
Yeah, real-time lighting is a problem that if you follow Ben Nolan, he hasn't posted about it for a while, but there was times when he was just like crunching numbers, doing math, posting videos of himself talking about how they have to crack real-time lighting. And it's a really fantastic immersive digital theater. He's a great project leader.
Can you tell us about some of the projects that are in the pipeline for Lexicon Devils? What's coming next?
We did have like a new event series that we were planning to do with the rest of the time in our Juicebox funding cycle, where we wanted to make a new Juicebox that would include different artists that we would use to run videos at our events and sort of like share several performances from different artists and use a Juicebox to pay those artists out from us funding it to them. And so that would kind of like get them to use Juicebox too and kind of see like how it can be used as a tool. And so that's the synthesis of our experience learning about Juicebox and kind of just trying to think of ways we can do it instead of just an event at Juicebox, but getting other people to use Juicebox as well through our events.
That's really cool, thinking about how to make that space more beneficial to other people that interact with it. I'm curious to know as well if you have any sort of dream projects that you would like to one day build, if not projects, then like events or other sorts of experiences.
I think for me, with the bikes, even before I even started to build those, like in a long time ago, my dream would have been to like be able to have my own metaverse and like plug in your real bike to a bike trainer and be able to like ride it around. I think it's Zwift is like the current one that has like virtual worlds where people do that, but do it like an NFT version. But I quickly learned I don't know how to do anything like that. So I think that it's always sort of having to constrain my inspiration and imagination to what I can achieve right now has been like the biggest challenge. But definitely like exploring more advanced 3D creation techniques is something I want to get into in the future.
Right on. And what about you, Peacenode?
Yeah, for me, I really just would love to continue spreading the meme of identity and inventory and creating opportunities for that mental unlock for people so that they can think about ways that they participate on the internet and where they put their energy. And then a little more tangible from that, I just really want to connect the dots. Like I mentioned, I've been doing this project for the last year called Song Camp, and there's so much amazing talent in there. And Wacko mentioned this show that we're going to be running, Juicers, and it kind of came out of the idea where it was like, we had this awesome musician, Fishnart, come on, and they had done a Twitch, but they had like fans come, and it was like just with all the technical that was required for them to like maintain their stream and DJ, they didn't really get to interact people. So it was just like designing shows, maybe with more pre-recorded material in ways that we can showcase and premiere music and artwork in ways that musicians and creators can connect directly with fans live in that scenario, and people can experience it together.
Very cool. All right. Well, wrapping up, how can listeners visit the Lexicon Devils headquarters? You have your own parcel that's sort of your home base, right? What's the easiest way for people to find that?
So the easiest way, I think, would be to hop in your browser and type in lexicondevils.xyz.
Awesome. And where can listeners follow Lexicon Devils on social?
On Twitter, we are at devils_lexicon. So if you search for Lexicon Devils, you'll see a little blue and black devil icon.
Perfect. And for you both, Peacenode and Wacko, can you give us your handles on social?
I'm Wackozacco 420, WACKOZACCO.
And I am at Peace_node.
All right. Well, thanks both of you for joining us on today's episode of the Juicecast. We really learned a lot about process of building, but also so much more than the building itself, but like the experiences and the opportunities that are available within this new world. So thanks both of you for joining us today.
Thanks heaps, you two.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, this has been super fun. You're both fantastic. Thank you for all the thoughtful questions.
It was really our pleasure. Like I said near the beginning, it's really fun for us to go full circle on our interest in architecture and chat with you two building so much incredible stuff in the metaverse. And also just as Juicebox contributors, I feel really grateful for your presence within the DAO building all of this stuff, because I think it really adds a lot to the culture in the same way that Sage's art adds so much to what we're building here. So yeah, thank you both for all of your contributions to JB. And we're going to be really looking forward to everything that you build in the future. So thanks again.
Awesome. Take care, you two.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Juicebox podcast. You can find us online at juicebox.money and on Twitter at juiceboxeth. Join the conversation at discord.gg/juicebox.
The Juicebox podcast is for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. Views expressed by guests and the hosts do not reflect the views of Juicebox DAO or the Juicebox podcast. The Juicebox podcast is not investment advice or a solicitation to make any financial decisions. Projects on the Juicebox protocol are not vetted by Juicebox DAO.
Each project on the Juicebox protocol is responsible for its own crowdfunding parameters. The tokenomics of one project may differ from other projects on the protocol. Do not purchase JBX tokens, other cryptocurrencies, or make contributions to projects in anticipation of financial returns. Please do your own research.